Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, and we're going to talk about the Virgin River problem. Alright, so let's get into this. So I've been watching, so we as Dungeon Masters, we are positioned to be there is a requirement that we think very, very carefully about the stories we're telling. We have a couple concerns, right? So we're allowed to tell almost any story we want, right? There are certainly absolutely some limits. Our culture says these things are out of bounds. It's maybe 1 to 5% of all stories. The culture's like, no, we're not telling stories about X, Y, or Z, right? But there are a lot of stories now where you are saying, okay, I have the right to tell this story, but ethically, is it appropriate for me to tell this story? And Virgin River is really fascinating because Virgin River opens up this question of what stories are ethical to tell. That's different than what you're allowed to do. As a dungeon master, we really need to think about what stories we tell ethically, right? And I've been watching this show, Virgin River, and it's really making me think a lot about what stories should we ethically tell, all right? So let me explain this Virgin River show, why I'm watching it, and what its problematic storytelling is, and the questions it asks to every single dungeon master with the stories that they are electing to tell, right? Because as a dungeon master, in your life, you might tell 100 to maybe 300 distinct stories, right? You have a certain number, and every story you tell displaces another story, right? And so, and we don't just ask what are we allowed to tell. There's also this question of what's ethical for us to choose. If we choose this story and we displace another story, what is our impact on our players? What is our impact on our community? What is our impact on our society? Because the stories we tell impact our players, our community, and our society. Okay? All right, so all that's in place. Let's talk about Virgin River. Virgin River is a really fascinating show. I'm not sure what to do with it. I'm not sure. It really opens up some huge questions about storytelling and about culture and about what people want to, what stories people want to receive, and what stories we should give them. Okay. All right, so let's talk about Virgin River. So first of all, how did I find this thing? So it's been on Netflix forever, and I have ignored it forever. It's been on for 2-3 years or something. I think at least 3 years, and I have never touched it. I'm like, that looks like some kind of bog standard, non-genre, contemporary, modern storytelling about something. I don't know what, right? Like, I don't know what that thing's about. The title doesn't give really any clues at all. What the story is about, right? So the way it came onto my map is I listened to the best movie reviewer in the world is Grace Randolph, and she is, now that movies are virtually dead, and Grace Randolph's job is now to tell you how dead movies are. That's literally what she's doing week by week now. It's like, oh, here's some more evidence that movies will never come back, right? And honestly, that's a tough load to carry, but she does a great job with it. And one of the things she does now is she has switched over to covering top 10 lists for television, because that's her life now, right? Because movies are so bad that the real activity for movies is on a good portion of the activities for movies is on streaming now, right? So she covers streaming, and she goes into Netflix and she talks about the shows they're showing on Netflix. And literally for the last year and a half, she's been like, what is Virgin River? Why does this thing keep poking up onto the top 10, right? And she wouldn't shut up about it. And the reason why is the thing is constantly in the top 10. Every time a new season drops, it's on top 10. Just even times when there's no new season, it spikes up in the top 10. A ton of people are watching Virgin River, right? And so Grace would just not shut up about the show, just complaining about it. And I'm like, I got to see what this thing is. I keep hearing about it, and I still, a year and a half later, I don't have any idea what this thing is. I got to see what the show is. So I watched it, right? I've actually watched about 6 episodes of it, okay? And its first 3 episodes are really tight, really cool story arc that is very compelling and very interesting, but very problematic. So let's talk about it. Okay, so Virgin River, the name of the show, is for a town in Northern California, but it is a very bizarre town, right? So when you think of when I think of California, I think coastal elite, right? But I have a good friend, or actually I have somebody I'm acquainted with who lives in California, and they have explained to me, you have no idea about California. It's huge, right? So you think of, when people think about California, they think about LA and the beach scene and Hollywood, right? But that's not all there is to California. And he said in Northern California, there are these areas that really function exactly like the heartland. They function like they function like Kansas, right? They are heartland, where people are, God, country, and one other thing, right? And like really patriotic and old school and quite conservative and just not what you would expect from California. So Virgin River is about a town in California that functions like a town in Kansas, right? Heartland, California. That's the story, okay? And it's just, there's no magic. It's just a story of a tiny American town that is very heartland based, okay? So that's Virgin River. The first three episodes of the story is an abandoned baby. A baby that is abandoned on the doorstep of a local small town doctor, okay? Now here's where it gets problematic. As soon as this happens, the little town of Virgin River has a knitting circle. Now in this knitting circle, there's a bunch of women, right? And they immediately start a phone tree and to discover who the mother is of the baby and return the baby to the mother, right? Now there's a big city nurse who's like, we should just call social services, right? And they're like, are you out of your mind? No, we want to get this baby back to the mother, right? Now this is incredibly problematic, right? Because one, the show is just marinated in these old school concepts, right? Here, well, let's tick them off. One, knitting circles are filled with women, right? Now, in our modern understanding, we realize that gender is a construct. Women are no more interested in knitting than men are, right? In our modern understanding, also, if a child is abandoned, the mother is no more likely to nurture that baby than a father is, right? Now, so let's talk about this story. This story, we understand now that trans people can have babies, men can have babies, women can have babies, of course, right? But that's our new modern understanding, right? This show is putting this old idea, right, where a man is with a woman, and then the output of that, a biological man is with a biological woman, and the output of that is a biological baby. That used to happen. Like, it used to happen. I think it still happens every now and then now, right? But this story is telling this old school idea that a biological man and a biological woman were together for one night. The man went on his merry way and didn't even know there was any output of that evening, right? The woman had the child and then abandoned the child on the doorstep in a basket on the doctor's, on the doctor's doorstep, right? Now this show goes forward, and these women in a women's knitting circle, which, come on, we as modern people, we understand that knitting circles are equally split between men and women now, right? But this show is dealing with these old concepts, right? And then the women in the knitting circle are like, we need to get this baby back to its mother, right? And the reason why is we believe that because that woman had the baby in her womb for 9 months, she will be more engaged with the baby than the father would. So none of the women seek out the father of the baby to take care of the baby. They're only concerned with finding the mother, from this idea that there would be this old ancient idea that there would be a biological connection and the mother would care for the child more than the father would, right? Ridiculous. It's absurd. Our new modern understanding tells us that gender is a construct, and even though a baby is is from that old pattern, a baby would be in the mother's belly for 9 months, and the mother would be able to feel it and rub it, and then they would hear its heartbeat, and the baby would hear the mother's heartbeat and share its own blood. That connection, that biological connection, is meaningless. We know this now, right? We know that doesn't matter, and that father, if he was told that there was a baby, he would run just as quickly as the mother and be just as engaged as the mother would, because the biological connection is meaningless, right? Here's the problem. Virgin River ignores all of this, right? And they're putting forward these super weird ancient ideas that a mother's having a baby in her belly, and then hearing its heartbeat and feeling it and like having this biological connection matters, right? Now, we know this to be ridiculous at this point, right? Modern understanding has informed us, and now we know that gender is a construct. It's not real, right? But Virgin River comes from this idea that it is real, right? And that a mother would care more for a baby than a father, right? And I'm like, boy, that's pretty ludicrous, right? So with these ancient, crusty, weird ideas in the middle of this show, this is going to be a massive reality break for most viewers, right? And they're going to be this is crazy. Like, who would watch this junk, right? Well, apparently, crap tons of people, like a whole lot of people, are right there for it, right? And are just eating this up with a spoon, right? Tons. Like, apparently, there's a ton of people that are still entertaining the idea that gender is not a construct, right? And that biology would have an impact on how a woman engaged with a baby, right? And so that brings the question to Dungeons and Dragons, right? So first of all, why are people eating this up? We know gender is a construct. That is the new understanding. We know that the 9 months of a baby being in a mother's womb is meaningless, and that any man can immediately generate exactly the same amount of love, care, and nurturing for a child as a woman can. We know this, right? Gender is a construct. This is an established fact at this point with the new understanding, right? So, right? Then why on earth would people not be jarred by this ridiculous old school idea that biology matters, right? And just really, it would not disconnect from the story, but it would actually engage them and compel them, right? Well, I think the only possible reason could be comfort, right? They have this idea that they're comforted by the idea, right? And so essentially, Virgin River functions as a pie shop, okay? I live on the East Coast. There are no pie shops on the East Coast, right? But I have family who lives in Indiana through my wife, my in-laws, right? And we go and visit them once every year or two. And when we get out there, we go to a pie shop. There's nothing at the shop except pie, right? I'm like, what? The whole place is pie? Right? Like, it's fantastic. I love it, right? But it's a pie shop. It's for comfort, right? Like, you could not go to a pie shop and get what you need to live, right? But you can get what you need to be comforted, right? So I think Virgin River is functioning as a pie shop, right? It's letting people engage with old stories, with old ideas, right? Here's the question. Is that ethical, right? That is displacing other stories, right? There were resources that were used to make Virgin River that were not given to more appropriate stories about men nurturing babies, or like a trans person nurturing a baby, or like, so those other more realistic, more stories that connect with what we know now, that gender is a construct, motherhood is no more important than fatherhood. It's just parenthood, right? So we know that now, right? So that's the question now. Can we continue to tell comfort stories as dungeon masters? Can we let people engage with old ideas that they feel very comfortable with, even knowing that those old ideas are now ridiculous and foolish, right? That is the question that I think Virgin River poses. My answer is complex. I'm going to give my answer, and I'm really curious what your answer is. I think the answer is yes. I think there's still a place in the world for pie shops. It is okay for people to engage with these stories from the idea of comfort, right? Of course, they're just saying, "Hey, I'm having a piece of pie. I'm enjoying this moment. This isn't where I'm going to get sustenance, right? This isn't my real meal, right?" So I think it might be okay, especially since we've had like millennia or centuries of these old ideas, to allow people to be comforted with these stories. And I think it may be still appropriate. I think it's okay that there are pie shops in Indiana, right? Now, just to be clear, there are no pie shops on the East Coast, right? Well, actually in my area, I think there might, if you go south, right? But like in coastal elite areas, there are no pie shops, right? Like it's not a thing. But I think, yeah, we're a nation, and we still have people who really are comfortable with these old ideas. And I think we can tell these stories. We have to be careful, though. I would say that the ratio should be no more than 2/3, right? So you could tell stories with your Dungeons and Dragons, and I think those stories can be connected to very old ideas and can really carry the ball for old ideas, as long as 1/3 of those stories are still connected to reality, right? Our new reality is gender as a construct. Women's biological connections to babies doesn't mean anything. Men can immediately muster exactly the same amount of love, care, and attention and be just as good nurturers as women, right? The biological connection of women to babies we know that to be meaningless now, right? And that it can be generated by any person, right? But I do think it is okay to make an ethical, aware choice to tell these older stories the way Virgin Run is doing, so that we don't disconnect the game from the majority of people. Because one of the things that Virgin River is showing is that these old ideas have not been swept away, and they are still very much in the place of people's minds and hearts. Even though we now know them to be ludicrous and meaningless and useless, they're still holding on in their minds and hearts. But as a tolerant people, we're tolerant to everyone, even people who have old ideas that are clearly silly, right? The silly idea that, a mom having a baby in her belly and, feeling its heartbeat and rubbing it and, just having this very, very tangible biological connection, men can muster that immediately. Like any man can muster that immediately. And that old biological connection is completely useless and meaningless at this point. We understand that now. But I think that we have to have tolerance for these people who still connect to that old idea, right? And we can serve up a piece of pie as long as we're also serving up some protein on that third, right? So I think that these pie stories, right, these allowing people to connect to these old ideas, these ridiculous ideas, is okay as long as we're aware of what we're doing and the ratio is correct. And I think the ratio is 2/3 of your stories could be these old stories, and 1/3 really need to be connected to reality, right? Gender is a construct. So like 1/3 of your D&D games should carry that idea that gender is a construct and the new understandings rather than the old. But we don't want the game to be disconnected from the masses, right? And the masses are saying that Virgin River has a point, right? That biology matters and that women would be connected to children more because they had this biological connection to them, right? And while we know that's completely irrelevant, silly, ludicrous, right, we still need to have tolerance and patience for these people. Well, that's my opinion. What do you think? What do you think the ratio of these pie stories should be, right? And how many of our stories should be making sure that our players, our community, and our society know the new reality, right? Which is, gender as a construct. And ideas like gender as a construct, right? Things that are relatively new, like maybe only 10, 20 years old, right? I'm sure it's a little older than that, but have only gotten traction within the last. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing. I'd love to hear your ideas on the full range of this concept. I really think it's quite interesting and quite unique. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.